And the reason she became aware of that dishonesty because she was really looking to be righteous in the eyes of God. She didn't want to lie. And then she saw her own mind and wondered where these fantasies comes from. So she started having this conversation. This is all happening in her head, this conversation with this voice, let's say. And she laid there in silence, having this conversation, questioning why she had fantasies. Is there harm in her fantasy? Her husband doesn't know she hasn't. Does it really matter if he knows? Hi, my name is Cassandra, a walk-in. I walked into this body in 2012. I'm going to continue with the story of the walkout experience and the life before the walkout and before I came into this body. I wanted to talk about the experience of when she became aware of the voices in her head. This is a very valuable experience because it's relatable and it is how our system that we're in currently runs with unconscious behavior in a lot of humanity. So, as I continue with the story of voices, you can relate it to your own journey and relate it to just the environment that you're in and how it's possible that you've experienced this yourself or that you actually start to recognize what that voice is in your head and your own honesty or self-honesty within that. The voices in her head when she became aware of this thought. One evening, she was laying in bed and, as per usual, going over the thought that people lie and they don't tell the truth. And she's dissecting herself where she's not fully truthful and practicing this point. And as she's laying there, she recognizes that there's actually this conversation going on within her head. She also recognizes that a lot of things she's doing while she's thinking, they're not all just conversations. There's imaginations, a lot of imaginations, fantasies, things that she thought about in ways that she just assumed were part of her and never consciously stopped and took a moment to question why she would be thinking this or having these thoughts. For example, fantasies. And as she was laying there, she became aware that she has fantasies. She wasn't a being who read or watched any kind of porn or that would be against her religion. She had her experience growing up in college years of different sexual encounters before she married a Mormon man. And she understood enough about sexuality. It was everywhere. It was in the movies. It was in everything. It was in novels, romance novels, books. And in movies and things like that, there was this romance and visions and images where characters would come together in love stories and sexual intimacy. And in her mind, she could see that she had fantasies. Now, these fantasies were hers, and potentially they were harmless until this moment she realized, why do I even have fantasies? If I am married and happy and monogamous, why would I feel the need to conjure up an image while I'm in an intimate moment? And she looked at her own mind to see that does happen. And until it wasn't until that moment that she became aware that might be dishonest. And the reason she became aware of that dishonesty because she was really looking to be righteous in the eyes of God. She didn't want to lie. And then she saw her own mind and wondered where these fantasies comes from. So she started having this conversation. This is all happening in her head, this conversation with this voice, let's say. And she laid there in silence, having this conversation, questioning why she had fantasies. Is there harm in her fantasies? Her husband doesn't know she has them. Does it really matter if he knows? So let's say they were intimate and lovemaking, then she could bring up the energy of a movie scene or some two other people having experience and then express this and then have her experience with the physical husband and the physical act. And at this point, there wasn't a lot of dots connecting, but there was questioning of it. And as she laid there questioning these, she had the thought that if I'm having these and I'm me and I'm having these and I'm a good person, then my husband must have fantasies too. So she pondered that and she said, oh, for sure. And she also knew like he had a preference in a particular type of what he found attractive in a woman and all of that stuff that was conversated about before. We both had personal experiences in our life before meeting. And she thought he has them too. And at this point, she wasn't thinking they were harmful or anything. She was just more curious of if he would share. Like he must have fantasies. And the conversations like, why do we have these fantasies? Why are they there? So as they were laying there, she decided to ask him what he was thinking because clearly he's just laying there. He has to be thinking something. So she asked him, what are you thinking about? And immediately he said, nothing, so fast. And she said, of course, you have to be thinking of something. I'm thinking of stuff. I have thoughts. So what are you thinking? He said, nothing, which was a lie. And she was surprised because it's like she said, you can't just be laying there and having no thoughts or nothing. You have to be thinking of something, anything. And she wanted to draw out and have a conversation about and ask questions. What do you think about this? What do you think of that? And at this point, he was just flat out denied having thoughts, pushed a little further to say, we all have it. Like my mind goes, which made him say, what are you thinking about? But she didn't at this point share the fantasy part. She just started saying, I'm thinking this and these things. And I'm just thinking to myself, if I have all of these thoughts, then you must have thoughts. And he went right back to, no, I don't really have any thoughts. This blew her mind a little bit. Again, saw it as a lie, but not a forthright lie. It was like a deceptive lie to oneself, but it was very unconscious. Then she decided that she would look at her thoughts more and this voice in her head and why this voice was there and why it was putting these thoughts there and why this voice would conjure up these images. And she didn't want to be dishonest. And she figured that if God could see everything and God could know her thoughts, then she better be honest with herself and try to stop the ones that may be dishonest. And it was very difficult to do when it came to these disease or just anything. You could be sitting in a room and have a thought about you're not liking to be in the room or not like a person that's talking, and then you smile to their face and pretend that you like them a lot. And she did that a lot. She did that. She really wanted to be a good Jesus follower, and she really wanted to do right, and she really wanted to turn the other cheek. So she would, even if she was not really liking someone and they really wanted to be her friend and she didn't like qualities about him, they would run in her head, but then she would just play out the niceness. And that just was normal. That wasn't something consciously that it was abnormal, or it was just like, that's what you do. That's just how you do. You leave those thoughts in the head, but the thoughts were still there. The judgments were still there about other people, but the actions would show something different. So she started to question this within herself and could only question it so far. One day when they were driving in a car, her and her friends and her husband, she decided to bring this conversation up about fantasy. And she said, we all have these fantasies. Every human, I was thinking, she said, about all the people in the world and they have these fantasies. And it's strange because why do we have these fantasies? They're just there. And her friends, it was a couple, they were part of the church and her husband, and they all just denied it in an instant. No, we don't have fantasies. That's not true. And she was adamant, yes, it is true. It's true. I know it's true because I have them. I have them. So if I'm having them, like I'm not acting on them. I don't think they're so bad, but they're there. So why are they there? And if I have them, you have them. So what's yours? Like you can't lie to yourself. And at first, this conversation was like adamant. No, nobody in that car had a fantasy about anything. And she knew it was a lie. She was like, you guys are lying. She even said, you are lying. She knew she could already see her husband's fantasies without even him talking about it. And she wanted him to talk about it, not because she wanted to play this out. She was curious and wanted to be honest. Like, if everybody could just be honest and talk about it, she would help her maybe solve it and place it. In that moment in the car, she's like, when they all lied and said that they did not have any fantasies, she also knew how miserable the couple was in their marriage and how each individually were completely lying to themselves about just their remaining in the marriage. And this point was fascinating because this was the point where she was able to speak at that point her truth of one of her fantasy images that were in her head that she didn't know why was there. It was just there. And this fantasy was about if she wasn't married and wasn't in the Mormon church, she had this fantasy or this image that she would live her life a completely different way and she wouldn't be monogamous. And she says, I just had this feeling that I would experience many different men. And it was really spoken unconsciously and innocently in the perspective that she just wanted like this image to come up so she could show like what was in her head. And if it's in my head, I don't know why. So you have to have them too. Maybe yours looks like something different. She wasn't going to judge it, but she wanted to know. So she shared, like, for example, I have this idea or fantasy, and she explains it. And the first person to respond was her husband, almost mortified at what she had spoken. And as if she had actually just cheated on him. And he was shocked beyond belief, which surprised her. He was so shocked because it was just words to her and she wasn't really going to do it. And really wasn't who she was. And he said, yeah, you might as well just have cheated on me. And she thought it was surprising, but almost a little humorous and really explained, no, I'm not going to play that out. It's just there. I don't know why it's there. I have no idea. And then he blurted out after that in a moment his truth about his idea in his head. And there it was. And I knew it. And then the people in the back seat of the car, he said his truth and she said her truth. And it was like that. And all laughed. And it was a moment where it was almost freeing, that all just knew the truth that was already there that nobody had spoke about. And this was very fascinating. They laughed for about 20 minutes because the truth shared was so opposite of what they were playing out and yet didn't know what to do with it all. They didn't know. And so they just drove around and then they shared this sort of aha moment. And in that moment for her, it was revealing. So she confirmed, yes, we're all going around with this, and I'd rather know and people be self-honest than deceitful. And she didn't want to hide anything, but she also wasn't going to play out these things, or so she thought. She just that they were just there. And this was the beginning of questioning more of how other people viewed in their head, and when they weren't speaking, what were they saying? This ultimately The curiosity and train of events led them to meet many different characters from all different kinds of belief systems. They discovered this word shaman, and they met some shamans. They through health and wellness classes they were going to. They met some psychics and spiritual people, things that would be deemed against their religion. And she found it very curious. She was open to hearing everything, and people that did healing work similar to what she did, but seemed to have this gift and this healing. And they had this child that was still struggling in her seizures. And so it led them to different types of spiritual work and healers that would they would meet. And this led to a journey of them meeting some shamans who became very close with them, who started to talk to them about different types of healings and what's going on in the earth and what's going on spiritually. And some of the language mirrored some of their beliefs within the Mormon church. And she was like very aware to make sure that even though she was curious, that she would make sure she wasn't crossing that line with what they were doing versus using the priesthood and that level of spirituality and God. And as they developed a friendship with the shaman, they didn't even really know what shaman meant, just spiritual healers. And eventually the shaman invited them to ayahuasca. And again, this was something that she would have thought would be against her religion and didn't want to do it, even though her partner wanted to do it. And they really took the time to explain that it was a root and it wasn't a drug. She didn't have experience with psychedelics in her life or these kinds of things, only heard of acid prior and thought that was a drug, didn't even know what LSD was, any of that, knew about marijuana. They smoked marijuana, and that was less of a drug, that was still a healing plant, but didn't judge them for smoking marijuana. And they used a lot of the THC oil for healing cancer and things of that nature. And we're really busy in the community trying to spread the word about how your body can heal and using different herbs, and marijuana was one of them. And then this conversation about ayahuasca came up. And ayahuasca, they were told, was this root. They had access to this beautiful root that came out of the jungles of Hawaii. And it had to be, it was against to the rules and laws of Canada to bring it in, but it was also, you weren't really allowed to go into the jungle with special permission to take this root out. And from this root, you make a type of a tea and extract the medicinal properties from it, and you drink it. And when you drink it, it pulls out, it'll show you your deep rooted traumas or sickness at the root to clear it. And indigenous people do this, and it's this wonderful thing. And that was when she had to really dig deep into herself and question, this against my religion? Or is this going to get me excommunicated? Because that was very important to her celestial kingdom journey, where she would do everything right and not ever go against God and not follow the devil. And perhaps this is the devil. And she always had to make sure that she was right in there, making sure she didn't cross the line. And her husband, who had the priesthood, was so open to it. She trusted that point as well. He wasn't a drinker, he wasn't a smoker. He lived his life, quite frankly, healthier in the Mormon church than she had in her life. He said, it's not bad and I'm going to do it. He had gone through cancer and he just wanted to clear some stuff that he felt was very suppressed in there. And he did a lot of healing work, and we did a lot of healing work to clear things. And he just wanted to have this experience. And the shamans explained it thoroughly. They also had talked to us about our Mormon religion. They were very gracious in it, but they said they don't have all the truth and that prophets been deceived, and listened to them, but just thought that they didn't have the fullness of the truth. So that became the next step in doing ayahuasca. And what occurred there to opening up this thing called channeling and what channeling was all about. She was very curious about DNA, 12th dimension, she heard this a lot, channeling, and past life experiences. And it seems as I'm speaking how a person that experienced all of these things didn't know what channeling was and all of these things. She knew the concept of it. She knew people did it. She knew there was people that talked to spirits, which was against her religion, but she didn't judge other people that did it. She could observe enough. They're talking to somebody, ghost, all of these things. So channeling, she just was super curious about it every time that it came up when she was doing healing work. And again, she didn't do channeling. She wasn't even aware how she would read, intellectualize what is channeling, psychic work, DNA, 12th dimension. She'd heard this word a lot in her training. And the shamans also talked about this idea you could go to the 12th dimension. What is the 12th dimension? It seemed to her that 12th dimension was like a frequency that you reach. And when your DNA gets to the 12th dimension, you would have some kind of answer. Like it that saying that and actually putting pieces of what that actually meant were completely disconnected. It was just somehow the DNA in the 12th dimension keyed in, like that means something. And I would love my DNA to be in the 12th dimension frequency was what her thought was, because there was nothing there that maybe would be bad, but it was more talked about like we all have a vibration and frequency, and your DNA, if it's got trauma or unhealed parts, when you get to the 12th dimension, those will be blasted out and you won't have these problems. And her desire was to heal and to heal other people and to know what the 12th dimension was. And so use whatever she could to help other people from their suffering. So this the big curiosity, and that starts to make more sense as to where and why and how she walked out. So the next step was the experience with the voices in her head, going into the ayahuasca and channeling experience prior to walking out.